And coming up now, speaking of Hootsuite, we have the managing director of Hootsuite, Ken Mandel, who will be speaking to one of our YouTube stars, Vsauce, about the science of content, how to get 1 billion people hooked without using illegal drugs. Ken, come on down. Welcome.
Thank you. How's everyone doing? Hey, we have a big treat in store. If I put this here, it'll fall. That's actually part of it. So I want to introduce you to someone. You might know him as Vsauce. You might know him as Michael Stevens, which is his name. But what you may not know is he has over 1 billion views on YouTube. 1 billion, guys, with a B, right? More importantly, 11.6 million subscribers. So I introduce to you Michael Stevens. Come on out, Vsauce.
All right. How's it going?
So
I should have popped up and said, "Hey, Vsauce, Michael here. If you've ever seen one of my videos, yeah, how many have? Awesome. Woo! So I've developed some catchphrases and whatnot, but today we're going to be talking about the science of content.
yes, the science of content.
Or maybe the science of content, how to have a nice, fulfilled life.
Works for me.
I'll do either.
So we do have some marketers and advertisers in the room who want to tap into your DNA of content. But before we get to that, I want to thank you. You know why I want to thank you?
No.
But you know everything. So when I was preparing for this interview, I was on my computer looking at various Vsauce videos of Michael, and my 8-year-old comes by and goes, "Hey, Dad." I'm like, "Hey, Aaron." He's like, "Vsauce." And I'm like, "What? You know who this person is?" And he's like, "Vsauce." And then he calls his brother Justin. Justin comes, "Vsauce." And I'm like, "Whoa, there's something going on here." And I'm like, "Do you know this guy, Justin?" He's like, "Check out this video." And I'm like, right? So we spent the weekend together with my boys. It was really nice watching 25 plus videos. My favorite was Fart Science, but not for the reasons that you think, but because it taught people about important things, like when you fart, you do lose 3/100ths of a gram.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, farts are funny, but like, let's take them seriously and accidentally teach people a lot about gas laws and how their bodies work. I mean, I was just reading backstage. Think about this. You are a donut. You've got a hole through the middle, just like a donut. Anyway, farts come from there. But how much weight do you lose when you fart, right? And then I get to talk about weight and the difference between weight and mass. And everyone clicked because they wanted to hear about farts. And then they leave going, "Gosh, now I could pass a chemistry test."
Yeah. And you know what one of my sons said? He said, "Well, because no two farts smell the same from one person, could the FBI use fart prints like they use fingerprints?"
Whoa, now you're blowing my mind. I'll have to do a follow-up.
All right, speaking of blowing. All right, so I want to know a little bit about your childhood. I want to go way back. Were you a precocious kid? Were you a talkative kid? What were the early signs that one day you would be who you are today?
Wow, we're getting deep. I had no idea. So, it began with my love of talking out loud to myself. Even when I was young, I would explain things when I was all alone and no one was listening, because if I could explain something verbally, I felt like I had more control over it. And luckily, when I became a teenager, I found a way to actually do that wasn't completely weird, which was to make informative speeches and travel to different high schools and competitively deliver 9-minute informative speeches to judges to try to win medals. So my very first informative speech was about ketchup. The viscosity of ketchup, the physics of it, the legal restriction on its importation, and it was really, really exciting to see the judges in the room get as excited about ketchup as I was. And I called the speech "Ketchup on Ketchup." Right? So this is just who I was, and through YouTube, I was able to just do what I already was, but for an audience that was global. And so the point here is that the channel isn't some like brilliant thing that I developed and tested and had audiences watch, and it's just who I am. And that kind of authenticity is probably the first science of content I'd throw out.
So speaking about who you are, I just wanted to put this slide up. What the heck's going on here?
Well, before YouTube, I was a male model. No, but seriously, when I launched Vsauce, before, I was a cameraman and editor for a channel called Barely Political. They are the home of Obama Girl and The Key of Awesome, which is just huge. And so you have Mark Douglas, the sort of head writer behind The Key of Awesome, which is a gigantic show on YouTube. And I worked with him, and I said, Mark, I'm starting a new channel, and I would really love to kind of kickstart my audience, and collaboration is the way to do that. Working with people who have already built audiences on different platforms, whether it be, you know, Twitter or YouTube or whatever, is the fastest way to grow. It's not competitive the way television is, where if someone's watching The Key of Awesome, they're not going to watch me. In fact, because we work together, if they're watching his stuff, they're more likely to wind up watching my stuff. So I said, look, I know you're really busy. Will you work with me? And he said, I will, but only if you wear what I pick for you to wear. And so he gave me the Wonder Woman costume, and I said, joke's on you, I love this. And we filmed one of the first episodes on Vsauce together, just talking about how I felt in what was uncomfortably tight. We had to cut it off after we were done.
That's too much information, but...
I've got more.
You got more. Well, I want to show another maybe early day one, and then we're going to get more into the DNA of Vsauce and yourself. This next one, and there's another click coming, but I just want everyone to appreciate this, and then I'm going to add this part, which kind of explains that this is what you were sourcing content. Explain what was going on here in the early days in terms of what you were doing here.
I got to be so honest, I barely remember doing this, but interacting with your audience is one of the great things that you can do on YouTube, and it's because I'm making, you know, a new thing every week, especially at that time. I could just tell them, hey, I'll Photoshop anything for you. It's not going to be good, but just name off different body parts and I'll put them all together.
Right.
And the thing is, this is a terrible Photoshop. Like, I probably blocked out the memory of making it. But Robert Neal TV totally loved that I did that. And everyone who submitted something and didn't get picked still saw that I picked someone. So a conversation was happening.
And it was authentic because they saw that there was a winner, essentially.
And that it was me who saw it, and it was me who made it. So there was total transparency. It was a totally kind of open, transparent conversation amongst friends, as opposed to, all right, there was a shadowy thing and the winner is this person.
So do you crowdsource your questions now? Because you ask these phenomenal questions. Was an early stage of figuring out what questions to ask, or how do you choose your questions?
Yeah, kind of. You know, what your audience and what your viewers and what your fans want is often a surprise. And so letting them know that they can talk to you and ask what they want is brilliant. In fact, some of the craziest questions I get come from the fact that I just allow anyone to ask anything. One of my favorites was, what's the opposite of a duck? What's the heaviest color, right? But nowadays, episode questions are coming from all over the place. Sometimes it's just something weird a friend said to me, or it's a cool fact I learned, and then I try to work that into a question later on after researching.
But just these questions, like I want the answers of those two questions, don't you guys? I mean, it's very compelling. Is that something that you think brands today, should they be asking more questions? I mean, a question for you. Virality. How does something go viral? Have you ever broken it apart with all your expertise?
Yeah, so, I mean, being viral was like cool for a month, like 8 years ago maybe. Now it's about, how do I make myself consistently contagious. Not just how do I make one big thing that may or may not be viral, because you have no control over that. But it's instead, how do I make content that is going to be completely authentic? How do I make content that is going to feel like a conversation so people watch and share it socially? And not just make that one-hit wonder, but make something that can evolve and become really close to who we are over time.
And when you create the content, are you so close to the subject that you really are not caring about whether it goes viral or not? You're just creating content for your own curiosity? Or are you thinking about how this will be used and consumed?
Well, yeah, I think about how the viewer could possibly share the video and why they would. So this is very important. Whenever you make any type of digital content, really any kind of content ever, it's easy to think, okay, well, my boss likes this, so therefore I did a good job. Maybe, but distance yourself and think, what would I do with this content if I had no idea what it was for? Would I have any reason to send this to my best friend? And if I did, what would the email subject line be? Or if I put this on my blog or on Tumblr, what would the sort of post title be? That's what I think about.
Okay.
Because people don't share my videos because they want to help me.
Right.
No, they share it because they want to help themselves. They want to express who they are by what they curate and what they share. Yeah. They like my videos so that they can tell the world, hey, I like this, AKA I am like this, right? And so I'm always thinking about how will this video help someone show off or settle an argument or look like the most fascinating person in the room.
Okay. One thing we learned this week, I think it was Maker Studios. They have about 6 billion views out there, and they said that 65% of their views are being consumed on mobile.
Right.
Is that something that you need to consider when you're creating content?
I say so. I mean, there are a bajillion ways to skin a cat, and there are 18 bajillion ways to be successful on YouTube. These are actual numbers. I've done the math. And mobile is more than half of my viewership as well. Okay. And I got kind of concerned because my episodes tend to be 8 to 12 minutes long. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. I should be doing like minute-and-a-half type stuff if these are just being consumed on mobile. So I had a smart math analytics person look, and she came back and said, Michael, the people that are watching your videos on their mobile phones are actually watching more minutes in a row. They're leaving, they're staying longer than people on desktops. And I'm like, this is all wet now.
I did that.
Thanks. Yeah. So anyway, when it comes to thinking about mobile, I often, I'll shoot my episodes pretty close up. Like my framing is this. Because I need people to see facial expressions even if my face is only the size of, a quarter or it's small on a mobile screen. Okay. And when people repurpose long shots onto mobile, sometimes it's like, is this person being sarcastic or not? I can't tell.
Okay. So I want to shift gears a little bit. Talk about content like this. This was famous content that was created on the fly when the lights in the Super Bowl stadium went dark. Brands seem today to have to almost be like a newsroom, right? They almost have to be that quick. Talking about your experience and what you've done and applying that in terms of giving advice to brands to create content as compelling as you do, but they also have to react. Is that something that you think is possible for a brand to do in an authentic way?
Yeah, definitely. And the brands that are doing that, the best are succeeding at it really well. And Taco Bell, Red Bull, I mean, it's ridiculous how well they are connecting through social media with their fans and creating people that are fans of this identity that they're building on social media. So a newsroom is a great analogy. I often see the Vsauce network, or a network of 3 channels, as a group of private eyes, right? And we're sitting around hunting down the facts and the cool stuff that you need to know so that you can be the first of your friends to talk about so that you don't have to do that research work. Okay. So it's a lot about not necessarily just one person or one personality, but one tone and aesthetic. We know immediately if something or a certain way of talking about something fits our brand. And that didn't happen in a day. It happened over the course of maybe a year or two as we tried to figure out what we were.
Yeah. And in terms of the journey, I mean, has it been something that you completely, you're always learning? Or do you get to a point where you're saying, like, time for another channel? Because I know you have 3 channels, and I think it might be useful for the audience to understand how that came to be and why there is.
Yeah, so back when the second channel started, it was also just fashionable on YouTube to be making a channel with a 2 at the end of it, because now you have 2 channels, and you could do things on the second one that people might not expect, and they wouldn't get upset because you still have a very solid core brand on the first channel. So Vsauce began as a video game comedy network, and I started to want to just explain things like I'd been doing my whole life, and I did, what's the deepest hole we've ever dug? Why are hot peppers hot? And I put those on Vsauce too, because they weren't about video games. But guess what? I was better at that. That was more sustainable for me and my personality. And so I eventually said, screw it. I'm going to do that on Vsauce. And this other guy that I work with, who totally got this whole notion, I was like, why don't you just take Vsauce too? Now, we also have Vsauce 3, and that channel does what I do, but with fictional stuff. Okay. So I'll talk about black holes, and he'll talk about what if Thors Hammer really was made out of a neutron star? How heavy would it be? You know, that kind of stuff. I want to
know. Got to tell me.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be so heavy that if you dropped it, it would actually pull Earth, you know, toward it in such a way that there'd be earthquakes and it would fall to the center. And it's pretty cool. Yeah.
I think that'd be bad.
It'd be bad, yeah.
Bad. So, what was the funnest video you've created in, let's say, the last 3 years that you've had the most fun producing?
Good question. So my answer would be a video that's just titled If. I went to South America to watch the launch of a rocket that had 3 satellites on board. And I'd never seen a rocket launch before, and I'd never been to South America before. Okay. So I go there, and I'm waiting for the launch. We're standing, and we're looking at the rocket, and the hours are going by, and they're delaying and delaying because of the weather, and eventually they just cancel it. And I had to go back to London, where I live, and I never saw the rocket launch. And I'm like, this is going to be my best episode ever. But then I said, wait a second, there's something really cool here. We can launch satellites into outer space, but yet we can't predict the weather 5 minutes ahead of time. That is amazing. And so I turned that whole story into a really cool lesson about chaos theory.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about your TED Talk.
Sure.
I want to talk about your TED Talk. It's redundant, but maybe not. You stated, tapping into people's curiosity and then responsibly answering their questions is a brilliant way to build fans and audiences and get viewers.
Yeah.
How would you suggest, again, a brand get started and do what you do, but in a way that is appropriate for them?
Yeah, so I'm surprised more brands aren't doing it already, but they're starting to now. Like, we're starting to see companies realize that educational content that gives people, like, this is the answer once and for all about why toothpaste is so hard to get out of the tube at the end of the day, right? Like, that's just a hypothetical example, but if I was a toothpaste brand, you should be doing those types of videos because people will share them immediately, and you build a reputation for being the source. You build a reputation for being an expert and for also just being really close to your fans. And not, well, fans might be a funny word for it, but potential customers.
But let's talk about that, because I think the word fan and the word audience are very different. Where you're building fans, you're not necessarily building an audience like a TV station might. These people don't stop watching you when the episode ends. They don't stop thinking about it. They share it. They do things with it. So is there a difference then?
Yeah. So the old school notion of viral is just about audience. How do we get people to listen to this? Whether they want to or not, they just kind of have to click because we've tricked them with something, or everyone's talking about it, or, you know. But audience is one thing. And audiences don't always come back. Whereas a fan, when I talk about a fan, I'm talking about someone who has taken some sort of action, like they've subscribed to you on YouTube or they've followed you on Twitter. And we're finding that when you build fans and you focus on building fans, not just views, what you have is a group of people that will follow you to new formats and new platforms.
How important is trust? And bear with me for a sec. You're talking about a lot of complex things. There's a lot of research that goes into what you do. It's very conceivable that you might get some facts wrong from time to time. No offense, but you're talking
Oh,
about,
yeah.
So how do you make sure that there's a mechanism for people to kind of say, hey, Michael, you were wrong about that? And the reason I'm asking this is because I think brands are also afraid of this brave new world because they want everything to be 100% perfect before it goes out, because that's the world we've lived in for so long in advertising. But when you're doing things this quickly and reacting to content, are you always going to get things right? And if you're not, what's the mechanism to deal with that and keep the trust?
Yeah, great question. So I go back to the private eye metaphor.
Okay.
So I'm not the scientist who says, hey, I measured a bunch of farts and here's how much they weighed. Instead, I say, look, these researchers wrote a paper and this is what they said. They're the real heroes. They're doing the science. I'm just the carnival barker telling everyone, hey, look over here at this awesome stuff. And then look at this, and then that looks really boring, but it's not because of this. So I'm providing sort of the color commentary on these things. So have I ever made mistakes? Yeah. I've misspoken before, and that's why it's so important to read the comments that you get, because the comments that you get is immediate feedback. I once said Lenin instead of Stalin. Okay, pretty, whoops. And people pointed that out, and I immediately just took the entire video down, re-recorded the line, re-exported and re-uploaded, because I asked on Twitter, are you guys going to be like really upset that I'm doing this? And they're like, no.
Right.
Like, you're dedicated to being truthful, not, perfect each time.
Yeah.
So they actually really loved that, and were willing to wait for the 5 hours it took for me to fix it all.
You mentioned the comments, because I've always thought that the comments on YouTube are always a little, they go very negative quickly. They're sometimes not, but you're saying you look through them. So you would advise a brand then to let comments flow, respond to comments, because sometimes the comments on YouTube are really crap. They are. So I want you to challenge me on that, because if I was a brand, I'd be like, comments are always negative on YouTube for some reason. Is that changing? Is that?
Well, you have the power to change it. So often, if I say something that isn't very intuitive, but I know it's right, people will say things like, "That's such BS. You're dumb. I hate you."
Right.
Okay. And you'll get some of that. Well, don't reply to that. Reply to the person who goes, really? Is that true? Reply to that person. And then on YouTube or even on other social networks, when you are replying to people, you're defining what the conversation is. Okay. And so I can selectively ignore and focus on the tone that is going to be most constructive. Yeah. Now, does that mean that there aren't going to be stupid comments? No. But I think that just not thinking about it too much is required nowadays.
So you mentioned other networks. Let's talk about other networks. You're primarily on YouTube. How are you using Twitter and Facebook?
After I release an episode, I frequently tweet out stuff that didn't make it into the episode, but it's still sort of related. That way, I'm still promoting the topic. I'm still making people think about that same topic. And I also use different networks to kind of display different parts of my personality. Okay. So on the channel, it's all very much talking like this and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But on Twitter, I might tell a few more jokes. I might retweet some funny puns and kind of show off something that's a bit more personal. But I could still do that on YouTube, but I might create a whole nother show that's like Michael behind the scenes. I haven't done that yet, but it's fun to sort of spill out all the different types of you that exist onto different places. And that's how you kind of let your audience know who you really are and the different facets you have, and that's what makes them fans, not just viewers.
That's what we want to pull out of you.
And I want to be really clear, you don't have to be an individual for this to happen. I think there are some brands out there, like for instance, Vice.
Yeah.
No one thinks Vice and just thinks, oh, well, yeah, it's that guy Ted's channel. No, they have a very clear aesthetic though. And that means that when I subscribe to Vice on YouTube, I am like part of their crew all of a sudden. I'm not friends with any one particular guy, but it's just that they are so clear about what they represent and what it means to be their fan and what they're like that it works.
I'm so glad you brought up Vice, because I had this other slide and I had no way to bridge to it at all, and I was sitting here the whole time you were talking thinking, how do I bridge this slide? Okay, Vice, everyone know Vice? Everyone knows the New York Times, right? So the New York Times, kind of had this epic fail last weekend. And I wanted to get your opinion on, have they really been getting this wrong compared to someone like Vice, who has all these contributors around the world? They have Dennis Rodman in North Korea for, that's pretty cool. And then you have this institution, this famous thing we all grew up with, well, at least older people like me, and then they have this expose of how they failed because they focused on page 1 and all these things. Is this where all news is going? Is it going like down the toilet, or is the future Vice?
No, the future is everyone. It's big enough for all these different perspectives to exist. That's why it's a little silly to say, here are the rules of making good content, because for every rule, there are hundreds of exceptions. Because we're talking about global platforms. There's room for Vice. There's room for the New York Times. People are catching up at different speeds, and people are entering the spaces at different times, but there is room for science channels and comedy channels and old school journalism and new school and everything. So I think we're just seeing the growing pains of like, wait, really? This is going to work? And it is.
I want to walk over here. Can we change sides? Because I feel like I should have to walk. We have this whole stage, and
yeah, I know. We should be
getting
some exercise.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to dig into something. The creative process that you go through, and the length of time it takes you from beginning of concept to final production being completed. Can you give the audience an idea of the process, of how long it takes and how you do it?
Yeah, so it takes about 9 days for me to produce an episode. And I work predominantly by myself. In September, I hired an editor who works with me out in London, and he does some preliminary research. For instance, I told him, hey, could you just look up what's the brightest thing in the universe? Just some bright stuff. But also look up like the blackest stuff. Can you do that too? Maybe there's something there. And then I spent a lot of time researching and writing and finding what I call chill bump moments.
Chill what?
Just moments where when I say the thing in the video, people are going to go, I want to tweet that right now. Oh. Right? Because if you go too long without having one of those, people sort of realize that they should be doing something else, like answering emails or cleaning or whatever, doing work. So I make sure that I've got a script that my initial script is just those little moments, those like, whoa, I didn't know giraffes had black tongues that were pink back where the sun doesn't hit. That's a great one. I didn't know this great quote about the chicken and the egg. Let's throw that in. That's a tweetable moment, right?
Yep.
And then I bridge it all together with transitions, and that takes about 5 days. Then there are a couple of days to finish up the script and record, and I just shoot by myself. That's why I'm always so close to the camera. Yeah. The camera has to be close enough that I can hit the record button behind the camera from where I'm standing, and I can focus the lens with my own hand, right?
That's amazing.
Then I edit, and if I'm in the same country as my editor, I'll give him the footage and go, you figure this out.
Okay.
Then when he's done, we both kind of look at it and polish it off, and it goes up. About 3 a month.
Okay, but so thank you. So 9 days.
Right.
That's shorter than I thought. I thought it would take even longer. But one of the things you mentioned in one of your interviews was that you like to camp out with the subject.
Right.
What does that mean?
Because here's an example. Why is the sky blue?
Do you
right?
know the answer to that? Because I've been wondering
Well,
that
yeah,
for
but
years.
the thing is, if you talk to people and you ask them, do you know why the sky is blue? You'll get sort of 3 answers. One is, I don't care. The other is, I think I learned at some point, but I kind of forgot, but like, it makes sense. And the third group is like, yeah, I kind of get it. I don't really care for you to tell me. Seriously, like, it's just, people don't care.
Who cares? Here.
But I really believe that everything is interesting because everything can in some way be tied to something that everyone cares about. So I camp out with these topics, meaning I don't just read, why is the sky blue? Okay, well, I go, let's look at all the different topics involved and just go down each rabbit hole so that I can bring as many chill bump moments, as many hooks as possible into the script. Okay, the sky is blue because of Rayleigh scattering. It's the way our atmosphere scatters light. And the wavelengths of the blues and greens and violets, they get scattered way more. So when you look away from the sun, you're seeing all that scattered blue light. But if you look right at the sun, it's kind of yellow because those are coming right at you. When the sun has a lot of air to go through, it's only the reds that are making it straight through and not getting scattered away. So, okay, that's the answer. But let's say you just hate talking about Rayleigh scattering. You shouldn't. Who was this Rayleigh guy? Who did he love? What else does his phenomenon explain? And one thing it explains is why my eyes are blue.
Are
if
they?
you have blue eyes, yeah, they are actually.
Oh yeah, yeah.
If
they're
you have,
blue.
So I learned that if you have blue eyes, it's not because there's blue pigment in your iris. If you ripped off my iris, I'd be like, ow! But then, if you ground it up into a powder, it wouldn't be blue, it would just be brown. Because at a microscopic level, the texture of my iris scatters blue. It's not pigmented blue, its shape just makes it blue.
Wow.
And you don't have that shape.
No.
No.
What color are my eyes?
Whoa. They're beautiful, but they're kind of hazel with like almost a blue Corona.
Yeah, Corona, my favorite
Anyway.
beer. Sometimes when I talk to you, I feel like my head's just going to explode because there's so much information, but you make it so simple. So it's like I understand it. So I'm about to explode, and then you go woo, and then I go, oh, I understand.
I don't like the word complicated. It's often thrown around. It's like, well, the sky's blue for really complicated reasons, but basically the light scatters. I hate that. Because when you say complicated, it's like you're saying, it's just, you're not going to get it. It's beyond, science is hard, math is hard. Instead, it's not complicated. It's just going to take a while because we have to start way back with what the heck is the atmosphere made of, right? It's going to take some time, but it's not complicated.
To you.
To anybody. If properly explained, what did Albert Einstein say? If you can't explain it simply enough, you don't understand it.
Michael, what did you study in school?
I studied neuropsychology and English literature.
I didn't. Okay. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, I alluded to earlier, was this subscribers versus views, and you touched upon it. I just want the audience to understand why having subscribers, especially if you're thinking about this in the context of your brand or your day job, why a subscriber is so much more valuable than a view. Like why subscribers is the metric that these guys should be looking at for their success.
Yeah, especially on YouTube where subscribing is
YouTube,
free.
yeah.
It's not like subscribe to me for $1 a month or something.
Right.
So then what does it really matter? Well, when you build a subscriber, you're building someone who is what I call a fan. They're someone who at least a little bit more than someone that just viewed what you made. They're connected more to you. And they've subscribed because they want to have you in their collection. It's just like when people say, oh, yes, I've watched every film by Coppola, or whatever you want to say to like, it's not because you like the director. Maybe it kind of is, but it's actually because you want to be the guy who's, you know, watched every David Lynch film and gets them all, right?
Yeah.
And so that's for the same reason why people subscribe to musicians and comedy and myself. It's a decision that they're making, and they're just so much more likely to share what you make, to talk about what you make, to become an advocate for you, and in doing so themselves. But also, they're going to follow you if you want to create new shows, new formats, new projects, even on different platforms.
Okay. We talked about this a little bit before we went on stage, because it was a tweet that I saw you put out where, does everyone know who this is? Chris Hadfield, Commander Hadfield, Canadian. He was on the space station, and he produced David Bowie. He didn't produce. He sang a David Bowie song. What's that song? Space Odyssey. No.
Oddity.
Oddity. See, you know everything. And
well, we were just talking about this backstage.
I got a lot on my mind. And he did this from outer space, which I think is cool. But what you tweeted was, hey guys, you better watch this video soon because he only asked permission to have it for a year. And then sure enough, after a year, it got pulled down off YouTube. And I was kind of a bit outraged. I was like, oh, and you were like, you know, chill out, dude. You were like, you explained why I shouldn't be so outraged. And can you just share with people how this all works on YouTube and rights and why?
No, I can't, because this isn't my background. I don't know the legal stuff, but you know, it's too bad. I mean, it would have been great. I think he needs to go back up into outer space and write some original songs, or you know, he's Canadian, isn't he?
He is.
Does they have fair use there? Could he like change the lyrics enough that, you know, or partner with the owners of the song to say, look, why don't we use YouTube's content ID system so that you can monetize this song, but I'm going to be doing this, like, you know, I'm sure there are things that you could come up with. I think the real lesson here is just how cool it was that he's circling the globe, and what he's making can be seen by the entire globe. Now, it had to come down after a year, but, you know, right now, a year's about the longest anyone stays up in space anyway. But one of these days we'll be going to Mars, we'll be going to other stars. One of these days he won't have to take things down after a year.
There's another reason I picked this slide. It's because you guys remind me of each other, in a sense. Because he brought space and the study of space to the everyday person. Before he went up there and started tweeting from the space station, people didn't think much about space. He took all these amazing photos, all these images. So I actually think you guys are similar. And I just wanted to, it was like a tribute, a little kind of mini tribute to you to kind of compare you guys. But I also think that, how many of you guys out there are parents? Right, so what's the one question that when your kid can speak, that you're worried that they're going to ask? Well, that's, yeah, but I'm sure Michael could explain that.
She asked where babies come from. I still don't know. I'm trying to figure that one out, do an episode on it when I do.
I'm just going to lean on this for a while, yeah. No, for me, it was, why is the sky blue, Dad? And you are able to answer that, and I think that's awesome. And with that, I'm going to close, and I want to thank you for being so awesome. And I'm going to...
Thank you very much.
High five.
High five.
All right. A big hand, please. Michael Stevens.